Okay, well, we are going to have a bit of a chat about what went on Thursday's meeting for the council. So, it's an interesting one about squirrels and the Camp Road, seeming like there was a discussion about the squirrel gliders and the meeting there Thursday. What's that all about?
So Thursday night, of course, was our standing committee meeting for the month, or standing committee meetings, there were three of them. And squirrel gliders, the big question, Chris, is there a squirrel glider on Camp Road? That's the question we need answered. And that's the question that no one's got the answer to.
Is it like a squirrel that glides or what?
That's a squirrel glider, that's it, yeah, you've got it. It's almost like the name says exactly what it is.
Yeah.
There's a subdivision, a 33-lot subdivision that's being proposed out there on Camp Road, which will be a good development for Dubbo. And the final step that needs to be taken is
environmental.
It's part of the Biodiversity Conservation Act of 2016. So you're right, it's an environmental process. Now, here's the issue. In 2018, 6 years ago, there was a squirrel glider sighted by an expert. Now, fast forward 6 years, the developer is being asked to pay $60,000 in offset credits to say, yes, there was a squirrel glider there. Because of that, there's a $60,000 fee. The developer says, I don't really want to pay $60,000. I can understand that, because we don't think that squirrel glider is still there. In fact, we think there are no squirrel gliders there. And this is the issue. You and I, Chris, could go out there and have a lovely week, sit there and look around there, and if we don't see any squirrel gliders for a week, it doesn't prove there's none there. How do you prove there's none there? It's very difficult. The old saying is that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So we can't prove there's none there. The developer can't prove comprehensively, conclusively, there is not a squirrel glider there. All we know is in 2018, one was sighted, not video, not photo, one was sighted. 6 years later, was that squirrel glider just passing through on his way to visit some mates? Was there a family that lived there? We don't know the definite answers to any of these questions. So that's where it came to council, because our staff are saying because of that, the process has got to be in keeping in line with the State Government Biodiversity Conservation Act. You need to pay $60,000 for the fact there was a squirrel glider there. And there's a couple of issues councillors had with this at the debate on Thursday night. The first thing was, well, who gets the $60,000? Does that go to the squirrel glider family? Where does that go to for that money? It doesn't go to council.
Build a perfect little tree house of their own.
Exactly right. It doesn't go to council, it doesn't go to the state government. It'll go to an organisation that will protect squirrel glider habitat somewhere, not there. Because the second thing is, if the developer paid the $60,000 tomorrow, then the developer could go in there and do the development, and it doesn't matter about any squirrel gliders that might be there. So it's not really protecting the habitat, this habitat of the squirrel glider. It's protecting some habitat somewhere for $60,000. So it seems like sometimes, and there's some discussion that we have in an alliance of Western Council. This is 12 councils in the Western region. And sometimes we see Biodiversity Conservation Act getting in the road of developments for no net benefit. If, for example, they said you can't develop there because there's a squirrel glider family, that'd be a different argument, because you'd be saying you are protecting the exact habitat. But when you say pay your $60,000, knock it all over, do whatever you want, and somewhere else some squirrel gliders will be protected. It seems like it's a bit complicated and confusing. One of the reasons this was brought in, I think, was more about development around some major built-up areas, say Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, some of those areas, to try and protect some biodiversity there. Out here, we've probably got less of an issue, but the same rules apply. Unfortunately, it's one rule fits all. So the final decision on this will be made at our council meeting on Thursday week, on the 27th of June, where at the moment, the recommendation from the staff is to refuse this DA unless the money's paid. Then that'll be up to councillors to say, yes, refuse, pay the money to the developer, or no, we're comfortable that there's no longer a squirrel glider or a squirrel glider family, so you can go ahead with the development without paying the $60,000 for the squirrel gliders. It's a complicated one, and it seems like a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about one squirrel glider.
They'd really have to set up a camera which ran 24/7 for a month or something to see if there is one that's there, but it's just a cost factor there too, and having someone to monitor it and see what goes on and all that sort of thing.
And even what you just suggested then still doesn't prove that it's not there. You could set it up 24/7 for a month, and then someone on the other side could say, well, that particular month, squirrel gliders are quiet. They're not going to be seen there. Set it up for 6 months, set it up for a year. You can never prove comprehensively unless you actually went and removed all the trees there, or you went and climbed every tree and looked for nests there. So it's very difficult to prove it's not there. Much easier to prove it's there if you see it, but it hasn't been seen for 6 years.
Oh, the poor squirrel gliders. Okay. Well, you also had a bit of a chat about the council-owned land at Keswick Estate on your meeting on Thursday. Tell us about that.
Well, it's fair to say that there's been some changes since that land came on. Now, if we go back through history, back in November 2020, interest rates hit 0.1%, lowest rate ever, historical low rate. So that was back a few years ago. Now, land was being developed around that time and land was coming on to the market by developers. This new group of councillors said, we need to develop some of our land. There's a lot of demand for it at the moment. Let's get it going. Let's make things happen as quickly as possible. It was around early 2022 that councillors said, let's make sure we bring this land on, get it done, because land's selling like hotcakes. May 2022, that was the first interest rate rise since November 2010. So here we are, 12 years of no interest rate rises. Suddenly May 2022, interest rates went up. We didn't get that land online until later on that year. There were some delays there with some of the construction work, unfortunately. And so essentially, when we brought that on, it was probably not great timing because interest rates were starting to go up. You go to November last year, they're all the way up to 4.35%, which hopefully they'll stay at that rate today. I don't think they'll go up today, but they could go up today with the Reserve Bank meeting today or announcing that decision today. So all of that means that land sales have slowed down a little bit. We had over 50 blocks of land that we put in that latest release, in that latest Keswick release. So from that perspective, we thought they'd go pretty quickly, but the timing with interest rates was just out for us. So we've only sold 18 of those blocks of land. We need to do something. So what are we going to do? Some people say just drop the price, but we don't think that's the right approach because that would impact all developers across the entire city where the pricing is probably dependent upon what other people are doing in that market. So we've come up with a few things we're going to do. The first thing we're proposing, now these aren't final decisions yet, they won't be made final until the council meeting on the 27th, whichever way council goes, but at the moment the recommendation is that we do a 12-month delayed settlement. So that means if you're a builder, you could buy a block of land, not actually pay for it, then you could build on that, build a spec home for example, and then sell that home, and at the time of selling or 12 months after the initial contract, you'd have to pay for it. So it gives you that ability to bring houses on. We want more housing in the market, and if that encourages more housing without dropping the price, we think that's a sensible way to go. The other limit we had on the blocks there, and this was a decision made in early 2022, we said let's have a limit of only 2 blocks per builder, per organisation. No one can own more than 2 blocks. Because the market was so hot, we were worried about a builder coming in and buying up a bunch of the blocks and then locking down that market. So that's changed. We now know that obviously that's not going to happen. So we're proposing to lift that limit to 5 blocks rather than 2 blocks, and to have any organisation own only 5, a maximum of 5 at any one time. So they can buy some and sell them off and then buy more, but only 5 maximum. And the third thing, at the moment we've had a multi-agency agreement. We've had 9 real estate agents out there able to sell these blocks of land. We think it'd be better to have it all in the hands of 1 agent rather than 9 agents. So we're going to go out through a public process and appoint 1 agency exclusively to go out there and market and sell those blocks of land. We think with those 3 changes, that'll generate more activity in that market, and I think we'll sell more of those blocks of land.
Yeah, because all the real estate agents will be fighting to sell the land. There'll be lots of interest around town for them, of course, and having so many real estates that they could choose to go and ask about it is a bit silly.
Well, we think it's basically probably not given the focus to that estate that you might have if you're the only agency that's responsible for marketing and selling those. So we think that'll work. And the bottom line is, Chris, you try things, you do things, you don't keep doing the same old thing over and over. Those 18 blocks of land we've sold have been sold by council. The number of blocks that have been sold by the 9 agencies has been approximately 0. So by changing to a single agency, it's hard for us to go backwards. We're not going to sell less than 0. So again, this council, what I found with this council has been really good is we're prepared to try things. We try things differently. We put some of those blocks of land out to auction initially. So that was something a bit different. We hadn't done that in the past. So again, this isn't working. Let's try something different. Let's keep changing because the environment keeps changing. What you're working with it keeps changing. In business, you never want to stay still. In fact, Jack Gibson, the coach of the century, the rugby league coach of the century, said, if you're standing still, you're going backwards fast. So you've always got to be prepared to change what you're doing to keep up with what's happening.
All right. Well, you were in Cobar for a few days, and you were actually remote accessing the council meeting for Thursday from Cobar. So what came from the council meeting on that day?
Well, I was in Cobar at the Western Division of Councils New South Wales conference, and then so I did have to come in remotely on Thursday night because I was out in Cobar, so I was back to my motel room and tuning in from there.
In luxury, of course.
well, high luxury in a motel room in Cobar. So I wasn't physically at the meeting on Thursday night, I was coming in remotely. But in Cobar, they've got, they're called the Western Division. So the councils in the Western Division don't include Dubbo, but the councils in the Western Division are very important to Dubbo. So when you look at the Cobars, the Burkes, the Baronas, the Walgetts, all of those various
council areas,
all of those, they feed into Dubbo's economy without a doubt. So it actually clashed. There's a group called Country Mayors. I would normally attend the Country Mayors meeting, but this one I thought it was important to go to this conference just to show our support, and it was appreciated by the attendees there. In fact, a few of them came up to me from different councils and said, we really appreciate that Dubbo's come along to the Western Division Councils Conference because it shows the Dubbo support for all these regions. So we had a number of speakers there. Tara Moriarty, the Minister responsible, came along and spoke, which was fantastic. Officers of local government spoke, we had regional development spoke, we had some other private companies speak as well. So for example, Telstra came along and spoke there. It's always a tough gig for Telstra because Telstra come along and stand up and some people say, can you give us better reception? That's always the number one thing you're after there.
Of course.
But even some things about the Golden Highway, for example, RDA Arana came along and spoke, and in terms of that was part of the program to show what we need to do to the Golden Highway with all the renewable energy zone components that will be coming out this area over the next 5 to maybe 10 years. So a range of different speakers, but as with many conferences, Chris, a lot of the value was standing around talking to each other about different things. One of the things that came up, which I thought was quite interesting, with the Office of Local Government, there's a committee that's compulsory across councils called the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, ARIC, or ARIC it's often called. Individuals from the community can apply to be on that, so we've had that happen in our scenario, and those individuals get paid a certain amount of money to be on that. Now, one of the arguments put forward by councils there is that those ARIC committee members get paid the same in Sydney City Council and Parramatta as they do in Burke and Walgett. The budget for Burke and Walgett and those smaller communities is much smaller than the budget for the Sydneys or the Parramattas, for example. So it seemed a strange discrepancy there to have the same payment even though the budgets are different, and it was pointed out that councillors in those smaller councils get paid a lot less, dramatically less. In fact, the Mayor of Burke gets paid less than a councillor in Sydney City Council. So huge discrepancy in the fees paid to councillors because of the different budget size, but when it came to the ARIC committee, it was the same. So there were some arguments put forward about having different layers or different levels of payments for the different ARIC committee members. They're the sort of discussions that are quite good, and what's good about that is around the table, or around a conference like that, you soon find out whether or not that's important to many people, or the crowd will soon speak to say that isn't a big issue. But certainly the crowd spoke that this is a big issue, so the Office of Local Government heard that. Lots of other feedback as well. I won't go through all the bits and pieces that were spoken about, but as with any conference, lots of good little things were spoken about.
Sounds like the Knights of the Round Table.
It'd be a big round table, but the Knights of lots of tables maybe.
Now there's a big event coming up on Wednesday, and there's been a bit of controversy about it. So tell me what it's all about.
So this is the Mayoral Developers Forum. I started this way back in 2011, I think 8th of December 2011, from memory, was the very first one we held. Now, one of the things that I love about this is that you get developers, you get builders, solicitors, financiers, real estate agents, everyone involved in the development industry, all in the room together. We as council give them a presentation to just talk about some things happening. We'll normally invite someone from the development industry to talk as well. In this case, we're having the Real Estate Institute Arana come along and talk to us to tell us what they're seeing in the market at the moment. And then there's a Q&A session where we'll go through and answer questions that developers and builders, etc., in the room have got. And then it's really just a discussion amongst people. What I love about that is that you'll get different organisations talking to each other, exploring different opportunities. What can they do? How can they keep developing in this whole industry? Now, from my perspective, I don't have an issue with that. But I have heard some people be critical of this concept because you've got developers and council staff in the room together, and they're thinking that's ripe for corruption. Now, in my mind, what we have is as a hard, fast rule, anyone walking in with a paper bag full of money, you're not allowed to come in. That's the first rule. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. No one's going to walk in like that. But if someone is going to try and be corrupt, they're unlikely to do that in a room of 60 people. If someone's going to try and be corrupt, they're going to try and do that behind closed doors, in secret, somewhere where you're not going to be exposed, and there's an opportunity to do that all the time. Now, you hope that doesn't happen, but history has said there has been corruption, not in our council, but there's been corruption across the state, across the nation, with development processes and sometimes with council staff or with councillors. So it has happened, but I don't have a problem having all these people in the room together. I don't see any, well, there's always potential for corruption, which you've always got to be vigilant about,
yes.
but I don't see this introducing extra potential for corruption. What it does do is it introduces extra potential for more development. And every time we have one of these, people come up to me afterwards, developers, etc., come up to me afterwards and say, wow, I didn't realise this was happening. There's an opportunity for us. Wow, that's a really fantastic thing happening over there. I wonder how we can play a part in that and keep that going. I'm not overly impressed with the state government, for example. One of their solutions to the housing crisis is they're throwing $450 million into developing some estates in inner Sydney, and they'll be reserved for what they call essential workers, nurses, teachers, paramedics, police. I don't have a problem with those people being essential workers. What I do have a problem with is that the state government's using our money, taxpayer money, to build an estate that's going to be 20% discount rent or thereabouts for those people, but they're targeting just those individual people in those organisations. And even within those organisations, there's going to be winners and losers. There's only going to be about 400 homes they're building out of this process. So out of all the nurses, paramedics, teachers, police officers in Sydney that are living there, how do they pick those 400? Why are those 400 the winners out of that?
Yeah.
So it seems a little bit unfair on the rest of the people there. I think there's better ways to try and develop more housing. We need more housing in Dubbo. But certainly from my perspective, from council, I think it would be crazy if we went out and used council money to build some housing and then give council staff a 20% discount on that. But that's, to a certain extent, that's what the government's doing. And those people I mentioned, those essential workers, are government employed staff. So I don't know that's the best way to approach it. State government, that's their decision to do what they want with our money. But from our perspective, we think development forums, 3D printed housing, things I talked about with Keswick, with 12-month delayed settlement, some of those various opportunities, I think they'll drive housing affordability, housing construction more and more evenly in a much fairer way than just picking 400 people to get discounted rent.
We definitely need to get some more housing for those people who are struggling and can't afford to get their own houses in Dubbo, and especially people who may be homeless who could use a roof over their heads, maybe something like that in town as well.
And one of the solutions to that, Chris, is there's often talked about a housing crisis, a housing shortage. There's talk about housing affordability. And supply and demand says those two things will go hand in hand. If you've got a housing shortage, prices will go up. And I've heard people tell me their rents are going up, just that prices for a house are going up well above CPI. So when you've got a huge demand and a lack of supply, prices will go up. I don't think it's appropriate for us to step into the market and make things cheaper for people, because again, how do you pick those winners and losers in that? But what we can do as a council is encourage more development, and if we can have more housing on the ground, we think that housing crisis will be addressed to a certain extent and the affordability will come back down. So the state government can do what they're doing, we're choosing to do what we can do. Plus, I don't think it's fair to take your money, ratepayers' money, and go and subsidise someone else's rent by using your money to do that. So this way, I think, is a much fairer way to deliver more housing in the market.
Okay, so is there any other big points that went across the meeting on Thursday last week that we could talk about?
I think you've nailed it, Chris. I think you've got the main things that have come out of the meeting. I think you've nailed those things. And again, there's more discussion to be had in 2 weeks' time, because those things from the committee meetings get fed through to the council meeting. None of those decisions are final. They all go through to the council meeting for the final resolution of council. And the great thing about that concept is we've had a discussion, we've had a bit of debate about those, we've all voted on those recommendations, but now we've got 2 weeks to talk to you on radio, for example, hear feedback from the community, talk to those people involved, and then when we do make the final decision on the 27th of June, much more confidence that we're getting those decisions absolutely right.
Now, there's a bit of an issue about you singing out some national anthems. What's going on there?
If you've ever heard me sing, Chris, you'll know that I can't sing.
Oh, no.
And I think it's important, in my case anyway, I'm not making comment about anyone else, in my case, know your limitations. So one of my limitations is singing, but on Saturday morning, we did have the flag raising for the Philippines, because we helped them celebrate the 126th anniversary of independence. 12th of June 1898 was Philippines' Independence Day. They broke away from Spain, and that's celebrated here in Dubbo because we've got such a strong Filipino community. This is the 27th year we've done this. We do a flag raising in the car park at council, so we did this on Saturday morning, and then as part of that I delivered a speech. We also had Vic from the Filipino community deliver a speech, and then we do a flag raising for the Australian flag, singing the anthem, and then a flag raising for the Filipino flag, singing the anthem. I didn't sing, I must admit, at all the Filipino anthem. I don't know that anthem. I did sing very quietly the Australian national anthem, but it's a nice thing to do, and it also is a reflection on how strong a community we've got. The Philippines is about number 4 or 5 typically in Australia in terms of where people were born, for people that have come from overseas. So you still find the UK is right up there. Indian subcontinent, or the Asian subcontinent, mainly India, is obviously very high there. New Zealand is very high as well. And then typically you'll get maybe the Philippines sits there in 4th. Sometimes they drop back to 5th place. But the Filipino community in Dubbo is very strong, so it's nice to be associated with them.
Yeah, we're certainly becoming a bit of a multicultural town here in Dubbo.
18.5% of our population, Chris, were born overseas. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how strong we are becoming. And what I love about it is we learn about different parts of culture. I'm not sure how many people down the main street, if you go and said, when was Philippines Independence Day? When did they break away from Spain? I'm not sure how many would say 12th of June 1898. So just learning about different cultures, learning about other things that happen around the world, learning about that here in Dubbo, I think that's a really important facet of Dubbo life now.
And welcoming them into our community at the same time.
And that's the feedback I get from all of these people from all over the world is Dubbo has open arms. In fact, we could almost do a marketing campaign on that. We've got open arms in Dubbo. Come along and be part of our community. It's a very important part of it.
All right, Matthew, it's been a pleasure having a chat to you on DCFM 88.9, and we look forward to having another chat about what went on at the meeting in a couple of weeks' time.
Looking forward to it, Chris.